Hi guys, we are still in chapter 6. We're going to be talking about ratio, proportion, and similar figures, but particularly today we will talk about solving proportions. And I actually like solving proportions because it's kind of funky, but sometimes it gets confused with multiplying fractions, and we'll talk about how they're different. Let's take a look at some vocabulary. So the first thing we have here is the concept of what is a proportion. Well, a proportion is simply an equation that stating two ratios are equal. So two ratios, we know what ratios are. I can tell you that 1 over 2 is equal to x over 4. What do you think this 4 would be? If 1/2 is equal to x over 4, what would that be? Everybody should be screaming 2. And guess what, guys? You just solved a proportion. They'll get a little bit more challenging than that, and we'll have a really slick way of doing it later on. And the other bit, which is going to be related to solving proportions, is the concept of cross product, a principle used in solving proportions. And here's how it works out. If I have two ratios that are equivalent, so let's use the one we just worked on. 1/2 is equal to 2 over 4, or 1 to 2 is the same as 2 to 4. Watch what happens, and this is something we've talked about before. If I multiply diagonally, or this is referred to as the cross product, what do you notice? Well, 2 times 2 is 4, 1 times 4 is 4, and they're equivalent. This is a principle that all true proportions have. If you have proportions, if you've got two ratios that are equivalent, then the cross products must be equal. And that's going to be pivotal in the next section as we work on solving some of these. So let's take a look. Example 1, we're going to solve proportions. So solving these proportions, what we're going to do is we're going to cross multiply, because we know that if two ratios are equivalent, if they form a proportion, then the product of, well, actually, when in my day they called it the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes, depending on how you wrote it. But I won't get into that for right now. What you want to do is take 15, multiply it by 66. So we're multiplying these guys together, and that's going to be equal to b times 90. I'll write this a little bit neater. So 15 times 66, so that doesn't look like a 60, is equal to 90b. When I figure out the product of 15 times 66, I simply write that down as, well, it's 990. So 990 is equal to 90b. And so the next thing we need to do is figure out how to get b alone. You guys know about this, right? What's the opposite of multiplication? What's happening to b? B is being multiplied by 90. How do you get rid of b? How do you get rid of 90? Do the opposite. So you can get b alone, get her alone by doing the opposite. So we're going to divide away that 90. What I do to one side, I do to the other. Cross that out. I'm left with b is equal to, well, I can cross those out. 9 goes into 99, right? Because when I cross out the 0 top and bottom, it's like dividing top and bottom by 10. This isn't just sneaky math. This makes sense. And I divide 9 into 99, and I get 11. So b is equal to 11. Somebody out there is saying, I totally knew that. This is so easy. I just said 15 times 6 is equal to 90, and then what times 6 is equal to 66, and that's 11, and so I knew it. And that's fine. That's not wrong at all. I would encourage you, even if you know this little slick trick, to always kind of process in the way that we're doing, because it is a skill that you are building. You can check it using the skills that you developed last year and trying to create equivalent fractions, dividing the top and bottom. Sometimes it's not that obvious, particularly when we get into more challenging algebra problems. However, let's go ahead and party on with this problem here. So and this one actually really screams, like, if you look at it, 9 times what gives you 36? That's the same thing. You're going to multiply the numerator by to find the n. I know it, but we're going to go through the process of using cross products. I'm telling you, if you develop the skill, it will help you out later on. So we're going to multiply these guys together and multiply these guys together. So I end up with 9n, that's 9 times n, is equal to 3.2 times 36, which is 115.2. And so this isn't turning out nicely, so I'm expecting that you might use a calculator. So you've got 9n is equal to 115.2. What are we going to divide both sides by? Hopefully you guys realize this now. We're going to divide both sides by 9, and therefore n is equal to, let's see, when I take 115.2 and divide that by 9, I'm going to get 12.8. So that's my answer. And I know, like I said, I know that you could have looked at this and identified that 9 times 4 would give you 36, and then take your 3.2 and multiply by 4 and have gotten the same answer. It's not wrong, but when I'm asking you to do this, I really want to see this process. Trust me, some of my 8th graders in algebra are still fighting this fight, and they really need to be able to do it this way. So just hold on. Let's take a look at another example. If we take a look at example 2, we're going to use proportions to solve problems here. So if the wait time at an amusement park is 20 minutes when there are 160 people in line, at this rate, determine what the wait time is if there are 220 people in line. So this problem is not giving us a proportion to solve. It is asking us to set up a proportion, then solve it. So what we need to do is really just keep organized. And so I see that it's 20 minutes when there's 160 people. And they asked us, they said, if this at this rate, so we're going to assume that this is a proportional situation because we're saying, hey, this rate is continuing. We are going to put X because we're trying to figure out, determine the wait time. The top part of my ratio is referring to time, and the bottom part is referring to people. So X over 220. And so now we see that this is a proportion that we can solve because we got our cross products thing going on. I'm going to multiply 20 times 220, and that's going to be equal to 160 times X. So here is the equation that we end up having. I'm going to draw a little fancy line over here and see if we can continue. So we've got 160 is equal to 4,400, right? If we do 2 times 2, we get 44, we add the 0, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we have that. I think I'm missing an X here, chablitos. There we go. There's the X, darling. Okay, good. Kind of sloppy, but you get me. You get me, right? Let me use a bigger pen. So 160X is equal to 440, 4,400. We're going to divide both sides by, yeah, we want to get X alone, so this 160's got to go. When I do that, X is equal to, I can cancel out, I can divide top and bottom by 10. So I really have 440 divided by 16. And now instead of using a calculator, let's go ahead and pull it out. We realize that 4 goes into the numerator and the denominator. 4 goes into the denominator 4 times. 4 goes into the numerator 110 times. And then now we can just simply divide 4 into 110, and we get 27.5. There we go. We get 27.5. And so what does this refer to? Let's make sure we're answering the question. We realize that if you are going to have 220 people in line, your wait at the amusement park will be approximately 27.5 minutes. All right. Let's try another example. All right, so here in example 3, we're going to use proportions to solve problems. If it costs $30 for 4 students to be admitted into the museum, what is the admission price of 20 students? And there should be a question mark here. My apologies. All right, so what's the situation? Well, this looks a lot like the last problem, right? So we're going to set up a situation. Let's do cost, and then students down here, number of students at the bottom when we're setting up our ratio. So check this out. I'm going to have $30 for 4 students, and that's going to be the same as, where will I put my 20? If the top part is about cost and I'm looking, what is the admission price? I'm looking for cost. Let's put an X here because I'm looking for the cost here when I'm dealing with what? 20 students. So the 20 goes at the bottom. And then it's really necessary to make sure that you put things in the right place, because if you go willy-nilly, just throwing stuff around, I promise you the answers will randomly be correct and incorrect, and that's not what you want. So order is key. We're going to cross multiply and solve it like we did the last one. 30 times 20 is going to give me 600. So that's, I'm going to do a little circle here and an arrow situation. And then these guys are going to come together to give me the expression for X. So 600 is equal to 4X. Of course, I'm going to divide both sides by 4 in order to isolate my X. 4 goes into 600 150 times. And so X is equal to 150. What does that mean? That means to go to this museum, it will cost $150 for these 20 children to get in. Make sense, my friends? I'm putting an arrow there. I'm sorry for being so sloppy. Let's see if there's another example for us. No more examples. I know you're cheering right now. We have a couple of assignment problems to do like we did in the last section, or maybe the section before. Make sure you go on IXL, check out solving proportions. I don't really remember which one. Do the 8th grade or even Algebra 1 problems. I think you'll be fine with those. Guys, have an excellent day. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.